How do you go from being hailed as a rock star of the corporate world, savior of Nissan, one of Japan's oldest automakers, from being a contender in the slightly unsettling top 4 wish list by Japanese women of whom they would want to father their children, to living life as an international fugitive after a high-profile escape inside a musical instruments case? I'm sure this is a question Carlos Ghosn ponders on a daily basis as he continues the fight to clear his name. Perhaps his private beliefs match his public denials of any financial misconduct during his time at Nissan. Or even if they don't, I bet he feels whatever indiscretions might have taken place aren't that uncommon in the environment he has recently fled. If Kobe Steel, Olympus, Takata, Ube Industries, etc. can get off with a slap on the wrist for a little bit of data rigging and loss hiding, why couldn't they just have left him off the hook as well? That's probably his thought process. That notwithstanding, he's in Lebanon now, and the Ghosn saga will probably take years to fully unfold. While we wait, let us take a walk down memory lane to find out how Mr. Ghosn became a loved figure in Japan after the high-profile turnaround of Nissan. In 1999, Nissan was teetering on the verge of collapse and was courting a number of potential foreign suitors to save their business. Initially, they wanted Daimler Chrysler, but after the glitzy European-American merger of equals withdrew their offer, Nissan was left with Renault, a company that had experienced and overcome a similar kind of financial hardship that had befallen the Japanese automaker. Having regained their footing, Renault was looking to expand past the European market, which accounted for around 85% of unit sales for the company. Carlos Ghosn had saved Renault and now had plans to do the same thing at Nissan. The plan, the Nissan Revival Plan, was bold, simple, and concise. Mr. Ghosn called for a return to profitability in fiscal year 2000, for an operating profit margin in excess of 4.5% of sales by the end of fiscal year 2002, and for a 50% reduction in the company's debt levels of 1.4 trillion yen. He was willing to put some skin in the game too, as he promised to resign if these goals were not met. He went on to accomplish these goals by implementing the following 3 strategies. Number 1. Move away from the inefficient keiretsu model of cross-holdings between Nissan, its suppliers, and more than 1,000 other companies. Number 2. Lay off 21,000 workers and close down 3 of Nissan's 7 vehicle assembly plants in Japan. 2 powertrain operations were also to be closed by March 2002. Number 3. Get new models off the drawing board and into the roads as soon as possible, and restore Nissan's brand equity in the eyes of consumers. Mr. Ghosn also understood the need for better communication between the company and the press. For example, in the year 2000, Nissan's investor relations department didn't even have computers. That was going to change. Although a dwindling practice nowadays, after World War II, Japanese companies started organizing their share ownership structure under a "you scratch our back, we scratch yours" system of stock cross-ownership. This structure was effective in preventing corporate takeovers by foreign interests and served as a safety network. When one company fell on hard times, the other keiretsu components had the moral obligation to step up and offer financial help or provide concessions. However, years of economic growth and prosperity had made companies complacent. Over time, running a large corporation like Nissan became an exercise in resource misallocation due to fear of ruffling feathers and jeopardizing business relationships, sometimes dating back 50 years. As became apparent from cross-functional group sessions between Renault and Nissan, Nissan was routinely being overcharged by its more than 1,100 suppliers, 25 to 40% for virtually every single component that went into their cars. Purchasing was also heavily fragmented by region and sometimes even by country, preventing Nissan from leveraging economies of scale. Mr. Ghosn would have none of it, as Nissan announced they'd be cutting down the number of suppliers in half. The company was aiming for a purchasing costs reduction of 20%, so it would be renegotiating terms with suppliers. Companies that were quick to put forth concrete proposals would jump to the front of the queue and receive more business from Nissan. The treasury side of Nissan was in equally bad shape, as the company dealt with 200 banks worldwide. To bring down financial operating costs, which stood at 90 billion yen in 1999, Mr. Ghosn took control away from division leaders, designating Nissan headquarters in Yokohama as the company's global treasury. Dozens of accounts throughout the world were either closed or consolidated, bringing the number of banking partners down to just 15, and reducing financial operating costs to 24 billion yen. Lastly, Mr. Ghosn tasked Akira Sato, finance vice president at Nissan, and others, with selling non-core assets like land and shares in other companies. In a truly surreal example, Nissan held $216 million in shares of Fuji Heavy Industries, the manufacturer of Subaru cars and trucks, and a direct competitor to Nissan. And it wasn't just Subaru. After all, Nissan had shareholdings in almost 1,400 companies. There was skepticism regarding the feasibility of unwinding this intricate web of cross-holdings, exemplified by an opinion piece in Newsweek published in late 1999. Delays in unwinding Nissan's non-core assets, including land and shares in hundreds of Japanese companies, could put off profitability for 2 years or more, writes George Vierfritz. Yet, despite the considerable hurdles, Mr. Sato and others performed a veritable miracle, meeting face-to-face with representatives at many of the over 300 companies Nissan had close relationships with, all the while under tremendous time pressures imposed by Mr. Ghosn's ambitious deadlines. Excising superfluous non-core assets and negotiating with suppliers went a long way in turning Nissan into a leaner, more efficient company. However, that alone wouldn't be enough. After all, Nissan was still operating at only 50% capacity, a dangerously low number for an industry where around 80% capacity utilization is considered the break-even point for profitability. The obvious, albeit costly solution from a job security point of view for the workers at Nissan was to shutter down 3 of the 7 vehicle assembly plants the company had in Japan. 2 powertrain operations in Japan would also have to go. The plan called for cutting 21,000 jobs, most of them in Japan, as Nissan employees were offered early retirement options or transferred to other locations. By shuttering these plants, Mr. Ghosn hoped to increase capacity utilization and greatly simplify the production model. This tied in with a strategy of fast model rollouts by reducing the number of existing car platforms used in Nissan vehicles from 24 to 15. The use of existing platforms can reduce development time by 30 to 50%, and Nissan desperately needed new, exciting models to reignite consumer interest in the brand. To this end, Mr. Ghosn headhunted Shiro Nakamura from another car manufacturer, Isuzu, in 1999 and made him head of design, giving him full authority over engineers to implement his vision for a new fleet of ultra-modern Nissan vehicles. Mr. Nakamura, working in cooperation with Nissan Design America and the Nissan Technical Center North America, lived up to Mr. Ghosn's expectations, delivering the Nissan 350Z, a reboot of the Z-Car that had taken the European and American markets by storm in the 1970s. Nissan also came out with a full-size truck, a new sports utility vehicle, the new 2002 Altima, named 2002 North America Car of the Year, a minivan, and the Murano. Whereas cooperation between different regions had been virtually non-existent before, now Nissan was creating market-specific cars to appeal to the tastes of consumers in different countries. Long story short, the Nissan Revival Plan was completed 1 year ahead of schedule. The Nissan 180 Plan, Mr. Ghosn's next set of goals, was also a success. Nissan's operating profit margin had improved to 11.1% in fiscal year 2003, a close to 8-fold improvement from fiscal year 1999. Sales were also up, and Nissan had reduced its automotive debt to zero, feats many analysts and even Nissan insiders had thought impossible to achieve at the time. In 2005, Carlos Ghosn was named president and CEO of Renault, becoming the first person in history to run 2 Fortune 500 companies concurrently. Now, he sits in the even more rarefied category of business leaders to have run 2 Fortune 500 companies simultaneously, and also to have had an Interpol Red Notice issued against them. As always, thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Please consider leaving a like if you enjoyed the content, and let me know what you think of Mr. Ghosn's turnaround of Nissan and his recent escape from Japan in the comments below.